Again, going to be doing my John Ostick impression this morning. I just want to say that I really appreciate Dirk back there. That is a challenging job. We can always use more help in the AV room. Now, please open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1. It's where we're going to start this morning. I want to talk about the image of God. Before I do that, I just want to relate to you that some of my favorite stories have a similar trope, and a trope is like a storytelling device where you're kind of using a theme, and the trope is that wrong characters are chosen to accomplish the mission. And so if you think about like Star Wars, you have this whiny kid and this kind of band of misfits and rebels and aliens, and they're gonna go fight the Galactic Empire. And it seems like they're just the wrong people to do the job. And in Spider-Man, you have Peter Parker, who's this outcast, this nerd that gets taken to this lab, and then he gets bitten by a radioactive spider, and suddenly he has to save the day, even though he's not the guy that you might expect. And this trope actually, I think, has its origins all the way back in the Bible itself. This theme, this idea, what we're talking about on Sunday morning. This was actually the homework that I assigned, and I didn't ask about it this morning. But one of the questions that I asked was, why is it ironic that God asks Abraham and Sarai, or Abram and Sarai, when he calls them, why are they the people that he chooses? So let's read Genesis 1, 26 through 28, and we'll hopefully recognize some of the irony here. Genesis 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." So when we forget how central this idea of being formed and made in the image of God, when we forget how central that is to Scripture, it's easy to miss the dramatic irony of God choosing Abram and Sarai in chapter 12. Because if you had an idea, if you wanted somebody to rule over the earth, if you wanted somebody to fill and multiply on the earth, then you simply wouldn't choose a really, really old man and a barren woman to carry this job out. Those are the wrong people, right? But our God does choose them. Our God does bring prosperity to this man that seems past his time. He brings life and fruitfulness to this woman who's known as being barren. So we're going to talk about the image of God for the next 2 weeks. So I get to preach 2 weeks in a row. I'm very excited because I want to talk in depth about the topic of the image of God. And so the first way that I'm going to talk about it is making more images. Why image bearing means making more images. And then next week we're going to explore what it means to rule on God's behalf. And then they're both related to each other, so we'll probably have some overlap. And if you're interested more about this topic, I really want to encourage you to come to our class on Sunday morning. I led the class from my house this morning, so I know that you can go to the class and then make it here on time. So I'd really encourage everybody here to come check that class out. It's on Zoom, and links in your bulletin, because we're talking about the prologue of the Bible. That's what I'm calling Genesis 1 through 11. It's this section of the Bible that talks about humanity as a whole, and it kind of lays out most of the themes that we're going to see later in the Bible. It's super important, and it talks about all of us, all of humanity, not just the people of Israel. That kind of narrows down to the scope of Genesis in chapter 12. But before that, it talks about humanity as a whole. So it's really important stuff. And I want to invite all of you to come to class. So first, the first thing I want to talk about this morning, as we start diving into this idea of the image of God, is the ancient context of this idea, the ancient idea of images. And you might ask yourself, why would we look at ancient non-Israelite cultures when studying the Bible? You know, they were all wrong. So why would we go and look and see what they were doing, or look and see what ideas they have? And I think they did get it wrong, for sure. But contextually, I think they were a lot closer to the people of Israel than we are today. So the way that they use words and the way that they think and the way that they act is going to provide clues as to how we ought to understand the Bible and what they're saying and what they're thinking and how they're acting. And if we try to import our own ideas and our own thoughts about the image of God when we see that term used in Scripture, instead of first trying to figure out what the people at that time, then we might be on the wrong track. As kind of an illustration, I had a friend when he was deployed to Afghanistan. So we were actually deployed to Afghanistan at the same time. We were both tankers, but he was assigned to a route clearance mission. So he didn't get to go on tanks. He had to go on these things called MRAPs, and he had to go find IEDs that the enemy Taliban would bury in the road. And it was it's the worst mission that you might be assigned. This is just not good, because you're literally trying to go find bombs that are hidden. He ended up in a village, and he ended up getting trapped, and he was trapped overnight because he stopped. His front vehicle hit an IED. It blew up, and then they tried to go investigate, and then another vehicle hit an IED. It blew up, and then they realized that the Taliban were putting IEDs in behind them, so that's called being backlayed. So they're basically just stuck and cut off. They couldn't move. They weren't in danger of being overrun. There weren't enough enemy to do something like that, but he couldn't go anywhere. And so the next day when I was talking to him, he was telling me about the experience. He said his command was radioing him and saying, "Hey, you should move your truck over 20 meters this way, or you should move this vehicle over this way." And the reason they were doing that is because they have some assets like drones. They also have a GPS system that tracks where all of our vehicles are, and they're able to see where they are. And so they have this kind of bird's eye view, and so they think that they know what's best, and they think that you should move it over here, you should do this and that. And he was so frustrated because they were trying to act like they had the proper context to fight the Taliban where he was, when clearly they didn't. They didn't realize that they lacked that context. And so in the same way, I think we have this kind of bird's eye view of history. We can see back, and we have the New Testament, and we have Jesus. And so we kind of assume that we are smarter, or we know more than the text sometimes, or we just kind of naturally import our ideas in, which is something I think is dangerous. So that's what I want to do, is I want to look at how do ancient people think of the image of God. So many cultures and around Israel use this term of image. And they also have stories about gods making humans, and usually when the gods make humans, the humans are their slaves. That's the story that the cultures around Israel tell, is that the gods, they get bored, they get tired of working, they get tired of striving so hard, and so they make humans to become their slaves. And then the humans were created to provide food and shelter for the gods. And so that's why the people around Israel create temples, is they make a place that the gods can live, and then they bring them food and sacrifices to feed the gods, and in some sense they're also feeding the kings and the priests that are there as well, as kind of a tribute, and the kings and the priests are representatives of the gods to the people there. And so they usually, when they're building a temple, they'll have some sort of festival. Okay, so they'll take however long it would take to build a temple, probably years. But the temple, once it was built, it didn't mean that it was working yet. Right? You can imagine a temple that's fully built, and just like Solomon has a 7-day festival to open his temple, to start the right workings of the temple, which means that the priests are brought in, and the sacrifices are starting to be made, and all this stuff. And so other cultures would do something very similar. And the point is that the temple is completed once they install the image of the god in the temple. And the image of the god, they would invite the god to come down into this great temple that they built them, and then the image would rule on behalf of the god over the people. And so when they offered sacrifices, they would offer it to the image, which was representative of the god that they would worship there. Now, if this language seems familiar because we've been reading through Genesis 1, it's because a very similar idea is in play here. Now, God taking up rest in a temple doesn't mean like he went to sleep or he goes there to take naps. Having rest in a temple is kind of like taking up the control room. He's able to operate the cosmos in the best way. He's everything's in order. Okay, and so when we look at these ideas, rest is the rest of the God could be disrupted if the right sacrifices weren't brought, or if the people had dishonored the gods in some way, or for other cultures, if another god had overpowered or taken over in some way, and so that would threaten the order of the city or the country where this temple was, because the god wasn't able to control the order around them. He wasn't able to bring the blessing that they had tried to gain by creating this temple. So they would worship the image, and it was a very like transactional kind of idea, because the idea was that they would worship the image, and in exchange they would get protection and power and honor from their deity. And remember, the God for these other places rules through his image. Okay. And for ancient people, they would diversify their investments, right? They would spread their worship out among lots of gods, because you can't put all of your eggs in one basket. And so this is kind of how the ancient world operated. Each city would kind of have its local deity, and then there would be regional deities, and they would try to get as much favor from the gods as possible throughout their time. Now, hopefully this is all interesting. So if you're in Genesis 1, kind of keep your finger there, because we're going to be coming back, but turn to Genesis 5 real quick. So what I want us to do is, based on that context that we just went through, think about our own creation story, the creation account that we have in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. What happens on day 7 of our creation account? This divine rest, right? God has ordered the cosmos. He has installed his image, and now he rests, or he comes to rest within that creation. And so God putting an image of himself in the garden, which in this case seems to be functioning kind of like a temple, is a very close parallel, but it's different, right? So these other people would use pictures of animals, or they would use stones to make their idols, to make these images, and then they would invite the god to come into them. But here, God is the one who creates his own temple, and he's the one who creates an image of himself, and that image of himself is the man and the woman. Okay. Now, keep that in mind. Let's read Genesis chapter 5, starting in verse 1. This is the written account of Adam's family line. When God created mankind, he made them in the likeness of God. He created them male and female, and blessed them, and he named them mankind when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. Okay, so God creates an image, and his image can create more images. You see how this works? So God is creating an image that is able to bear more images, or make more images. Now turn back to Genesis 1, because I want to explore this idea. What does it mean? Let's dive further into this idea of image. So Genesis 1, verse 27. This 3-line poem here is really rich, and I want to draw your attention to a few things. So we're going to do a quick grammar lesson. So if you don't like grammar, too bad. We're going to do it anyways. So the verb, hopefully we can see the verb in each line, is created. Okay, and then the object of the verb is the thing that's being created. So in the first line, God created mankind. So mankind's the object. The subject of the verb is the one that is doing the creating. So God created mankind. And then there's a modifier, which is in his image. Okay, so that's the 4 parts of this first line. The second line, it switches it around. Okay, so it's the same sentence, but it's been inverted. In the image of God, he created them. And then the third line is used to use the same structure, except instead of talking about the image of God, it says, male and female, he created them. Do you see how that works? So this is Hebrew Poetry 101. They're going to use parallel lines, and then they're going to swap stuff in and out. And the reason they do that is in order for you to compare each line and to consider what's going on here, what's happening. So what's happening is that the image of God is not man. The image of God is not woman. The image of God is male and female together. Right? This unity of diversity. And this is one of the things that we need to understand when it comes to the image of God, is that's what it means to be the image of God. In this simplest diversity, which is male and female, and two people becoming one, like we were reading about in our prayer this morning, we are the image of God by our unity in that diversity. Now, diversity is built right into the image, so that's what it means to be the image of God. And so this is easier for me to understand because I'm married, and so I know that I'm not the image without my wife, without our partnership, without our unity. And I know that if we expand this out further, as we kind of see how it's done in Genesis 5, that our family is not the image of God without your family, that we together are the image of God, because it's this diversity again. So I want us to listen really, really closely here, because this is kind of a nuanced point, but it's so important in our culture right now. Diversity is not the goal in and of itself. Diversity without unity under Jesus just leads to chaos and disorder. That's what a lot of what's going on in our culture right now. You know, when I was in middle school, I first heard about the LGBT community, and by the time we're here now, it's now the LGBTQ plus community, and they're just going to keep on adding letters because that's how that idea works. When you prioritize diversity, it's just going to become ever more and more diverse without any unity. And I'm not trying to pick on that particular community, because I think in some sense the opposite thing can happen in our churches if we're not careful. Unity is not the goal in and of itself. Sometimes we try to unify. We try to make everybody uniform completely, which is also a problem. Because when there are people that look or think differently than me, then I try to change them and force them to think and look and act and talk like I do. And ironically, when they're going to leave, because I'm going to, if I'm trying to unify completely, then I'm going to make it so that you have to fit in this bucket or get out. When those people leave, a lot of times they don't stop loving God. And so what they'll do is they'll create another church, and they'll try and repeat that process. Often, when they get pushed out, they're going to try and create a church that looks just like them, right? And so instead of this diverse unity, we have this uniformity. And what happens is eventually we have 30,000 different flavors of church, and it's shouldn't be this way, brothers and sisters. Shouldn't be this way. The church is not the church without a diverse unity within it. If you're on the political right, it isn't your job to make everybody in the church a Republican. And the church is stronger when we have people who think differently than you. And the same goes for the people who are on the left. And the same goes for any type of diversity you might imagine. God has created us diverse and unique because he knows that together we'll be stronger as a part of his body, unified under Jesus in that way. If we think about the book of Ephesians, the book of Ephesians is summarized in Ephesians 1:10 when God says that all things will be unified under Jesus, all things in heaven and on earth. And that's what we're going to talk about more next week is where this image of God idea is going and what that work looks like for us. But in Ephesians 4, we explore the idea, or Paul explores the idea of how the diversity within the body of prophets and teachers and evangelists, of all these different people, how they are to bring unity to the body by equipping and strengthening our members to do the work that God's entrusted to us, and that work of diverse unity. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 12, because what I want to now talk about is how this idea touches on the idea of family. So one of the primary ways that Jesus teaches us to talk about God's people is as a family. And sometimes I find myself having conversations. It's strange working for the church because you have conversations that you never have when you're not working for the church, just because people I think they think of you differently or view you in a slightly different way. But one of the ways that one of the conversations that I have is that maybe I'll mention something that I'm trying to do or something that the deacons and elders are trying to do, and it might seem challenging or it might seem like it's going to take a lot of time. And what will happen is that person will tell me, well, make sure that your family comes first. The duties to your family, and when they say family, they mean my son and daughter and wife. Don't sacrifice them for the church. And I'm afraid that's a symptom of this idea that we've separated out what we mean by the family of God and our own families at home. And I think the danger in that is that we can raise our own families at home to an idolatrous level where we elevate them above what the family of God is supposed to be in the church. Let's read Matthew 12, starting in verse 46. While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside, wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, "Your mother and brothers are standing outside, wanting to speak to you." And he replied to them, "Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?" Pointing to his disciples, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my mother and my brother and my sister and mother." Now, I'm not trying to say that I'm free to neglect my wife and children if I'm doing something church related. But what it does mean is that we are a family, just like every other brother and sister here. That family that are at my house right now, that family is family in the same way that you and I are family. That's what Jesus is saying. Like, are we going to take Jesus at his word here and take him seriously? Or are we just, he's just exaggerating? No, Jesus thinks of his family as the family. What else would it mean to be born again? What else would it mean to be born into a different family? It means to say that my biological father was Chadrick Morse, and my mother was Lori Morse. But I put away those connections, those privileges, any status that brought, I put that away in favor of a new family that I've been brought into. And I become part of that new family where God is my father and Jesus is my brother. And my new household and I are servants of the Lord together. And this is so important to see because for ancient people, family was everything. Family was who would take care of you if you got sick. Family was your retirement plan. Your sons and daughters would someday take care of you if you were going to live, past the age where you could work. Like this is so incredibly shocking for Jesus to invite people to be born again into a new family, to be part of a new thing. And it's interesting because for slaves, this is great news. I don't have to stay this low status. I'm brought into a new family where I'm elevated to be the brother of my Lord, as somebody who will inherit with my brother. For people who have a lot to lose, this is not so much good news. Right? If you stand to inherit, if you have this status, if you bring lots to the table because of your privilege and birth, then that doesn't seem so great a deal. And this is why this good news is so attractive for those who are low, and so it's challenging for those who have much. And so what I want to ask is this how our family here at Springbrook works? Should this be how our family here at Springbrook works? I think so. Are we present and involved in one another's lives? I think too often we become dependent on certain members of the family to organize events, create opportunities where we can get together. When's the last time you called somebody in this family, checked in on them? Especially the people who aren't here, who aren't able to come here? When's the last time we checked in and tried to make sure that they had their needs taken care of, that we are serving them in love? When is the last time you, as a child of God, as a child in the family, asked a wise father or a wise mother within this family for advice? When's the last time you helped a younger brother or sister through their struggles? That's what families do, right? All of our stuff belongs to the family as a whole. We don't think about our resources as our own. It's the family's resources. We don't think about our job and vocation as ours, but as a way that we bring more resources into the family, right? And so the last passage that I want to read today is in Matthew chapter 23. And so what I want us to consider lastly is that while everybody bears God's image in some way, so humans are created in the image of God, so everybody bears that image, I don't think that everyone rightly images God. And I don't think everybody is involved in this work of creating more images on God's behalf. And that's one of the reasons why in Genesis 5 it talks about Seth being created in Adam's image. But who doesn't it mention? Doesn't mention Cain, right? Seth is created in God's image, which makes you think that maybe Cain might be in the image of another. And so what we have here is, I'm going to set the scene for you in Matthew chapter 23. Jesus has come to Jerusalem. He is going to celebrate his final Passover feast. He's taken up a seat at the temple, at the most prestigious place in Jerusalem, and he begins teaching with great authority. And near the end of this speech, he begins pronouncing woes on all the people who've been abusing power and all the people who have all the most wealth and privilege in the society. And he's pronouncing woes because they've been using that power to abuse God's people. And in verse 33, he says, "You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue them from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come on this generation." What's a brood? It's a family of snakes. So Jesus is calling them snakes, and he's saying that they are part of a family that's this family that's come from all the way from Genesis chapter 3, when the snake creates offspring and Eve creates offspring. And we know that the promised servant, the promised descendant of Eve, would crush the head of the snake, and that snake would bite the heel of that one. And so the descendants of God's family ought to be crushing snakes. And the descendants of the snakes will be partaking in this work that Jesus lays out here. There's these two families throughout history that have been in conflict, will continue to be in conflict until the Lord returns. And so the reflection for us ought to be, which family am I a part of? What do my actions demonstrate? Do I strike down the people around me in anger and rage with the spears and barbs formed by my words? Do I keep my tongue from committing arson on a daily basis? Do I act like God is my father, or like I'm the son of a snake? Would Jesus have reason to accuse me as being part of a brood instead of part of the family? And so my encouragement today is that if you've been struggling to bear God's image in this way, we want to bring you back into the fold. We want to bring you into this family. If you've been acting like you aren't a part of that family, we want to bring you back. If you don't feel like you're part of a family, please reach out. We want that to be the case. We want to be this family, this diverse family brought together in unity under Jesus, the head. Maybe you can't answer the question whether you've been born into that family, whether you've through baptism been brought through the waters and been born again into the family of God. I think this is maybe the most important question a person should consider in their lives. Now, we have the waters ready here. If you're watching online and this question comes to you, please reach out, because we want to help you make that decision to become part of this family so that we can further accomplish the Word of God. Now, being part of a family is great, but it's also very challenging. And our own family here can be dysfunctional and strange and diverse, but also very amazing, right? And so we want to say, come be part of this family. Re-engage with your brothers and sisters. If you want to join this family, or if you want any prayers from this congregation, please make that known as we stand and as we sing.